Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are glad to have you with us today for this webinar on small business risk management. I'm your moderator, Jenny Alton from the New York Small Business Development Center Central Office. This webinar is brought to you by the PACE Manhattan SBDC, a regional center of the NYS BDC. The NYS BDC is a U.S. Small Business Administration resource partner with regional centers at higher education institutions and outreach offices at other locations across New York State. Our free advising, education, research, and advocacy services are made possible by funding from the SBA, New York State, and our host campuses. I am pleased to say that today your presenter is Rick Kravitz, former editor-in-chief for the CPA Journal and adjunct professor at Texas A&M School of Law in their graduate risk and wealth management program. I got a little tongue-tied on that one there, Rick. We also have Greg Callender with us, who is an advanced certified business advisor with the PACE SBDC. So you know we are recording today, and we plan to share a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides in a follow-up email. Attendees are muted and will not be on camera, and your chats will be visible to me and our presenters today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to type them in the Q&A box or the chat as they come up. You can open Zoom's Q&A box from the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and same with the chat. We will address questions at the end of the presentation to make sure we have time to get through all of Rick's material today. All right, that takes care of all of my housekeeping, and I now turn the time over to Greg Callender with the PACE SBDC.
Thanks, Jenny, and happy lunch hour, everybody. I'm Greg Callender, an advanced certified business advisor with the Pace University Small Business Development Center. At the PACE SBDC, the focus of the services we provide, all totally free of charge, are aimed at helping both existing New York small businesses as well as aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to launch a venture. Some of the services that we provide include helping entrepreneurs to obtain financing, assisting with comprehensive business plans and financial projections, developing social media and marketing strategies, applying for government certification programs, and gathering market research. Our PACE SBDC one-on-one services are offered both in person and via Zoom, and both in English and in Spanish. In a few moments, I'm going to place in the Zoom chat, two links. One is a link to our main PACE SBDC website, and the second link is one that will allow you to register in order to receive free business assistance from our organization, the PACE SBDC. In addition to the free one-on-one business advisory services, we also offer a variety of training and educational programming, an example of which is today's presentation. If you started a small business or are thinking about starting a small business, by definition, you're a risk taker. There's no separating the two. But how can you minimize some of the risk associated with running your business? Do you even know what all of those risks are? Fortunately, this afternoon we have Professor Rick Kravitz, who is also the former editor of the CPA Journal, to provide guidance on what can be a make or break issue for your business. Thanks, Rick, for your presentation. Thanks in advance, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm really honored to present some of the best practices for embedding risk management into your business. And very simply, risk management is all about long-term value creation, sustainable growth for your business, how to manage both visible and hidden risks that can become obstacles to your growth and profitability. So let's just take a look at a quick preview of the presentation. The principles of enterprise risk are as essential for small to medium-sized business as well as large multinational corporations. And this presentation will provide small business owners, entrepreneurs, and business professionals with the tools and techniques to identify, measure, monitor, and mitigate both visible as well as hidden risks. So if we go to the next slide, very simply, risk management is all about creating long-term value for your business, providing sustainable growth, and effectively managing visible and hidden risks. So if we turn to the next slide, let me give you a simple overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to focus on business strategy and strategic risk. What makes your business special? What makes it successful? Then we're going to discuss business culture. Is there a common culture in your organization? If it's a family business, do all the family members share those values? And third, let's call this systemic risk. We're going to look at technology that you currently use in your business, especially because most of the software and systems and applications are licensed and outsourced. And fourth, we're going to look at what I call geopolitical risk, not only supply chain risk, but logistics, outsourced software developers and technology support teams who work in China and India, Ukraine, and Russia. And fifth, we're going to look at reputational risk. What is your reputation among all stakeholders, vendors, suppliers, your employees, customers, stock and bond holders, lenders, and the community that you support with taxes? And six, we're going to look at endogenous or hidden risks. These are the risks that you do not control, but may impact your business. This would include pandemic risk, floods, power outages, and others. So based on these 6 risk factors, at the end of the presentation, we're going to create a simple, practical risk matrix that categorizes these risks according to their impact, the probability of their occurrence, and their severity. And I would urge you, if you do monthly financials, you should also have something like a risk matrix, which covers all the non-financial risks in your business. So before we dive into each category, let me share with you some of the recent and tragic failures of enterprise risk. And there are takeaways to your business as well. As you know, many large corporations have very sophisticated risk management systems that manage both internal and external risk. And yet we continually read about tragic risk management failures. And let me just give you some of the large ones, but there's some takeaways to your business as well. For example, Equifax, a strategic risk failure, a credit reporting company that had 1,500 data feeds that allowed hundreds of millions of customer records to be stolen. Now, unlike their competitors, which safeguarded customer records, the competitors viewed their business strategically as a data repository and took responsibility for their data security and integrity. And they discussed cybersecurity at length in dozens of pages of their annual report. On the other hand, Equifax strategically defined themselves as a credit reporting agency. They had unsophisticated management. Remarkably, they devoted 1 paragraph in their 300-page annual report on cyber risk and data protection, an easy target for hackers. But the takeaway from this is it's critical, regardless of the size of your business, to define what is your mission and what is your business strategy. Then we could talk about CrowdStrike, technology risk failure. A faulty patch update in a Microsoft system grounded an entire fleet of Delta Airline planes in the South. The takeaway, does your vendor notify you of updates to their software and whether it has been tested? CrowdStrike patch impacted 21,000 businesses and billions of customers. Then this is the most tragic, I think. It's systemic risk. And the question is, do you communicate constantly with your peers in your company and with others? In the Challenger disaster, the General Accounting Office, the GAO, 2 years before the Challenger launch, reported that the 10-cent O-rings manufactured by Morton Thiokol were not tested in freezing conditions. But unfortunately, this was never communicated to the launch team, the engineering team, or the astronauts. Systemic risk. And it was 12 degrees, it was freezing when the liftoff occurred. Do you communicate with your peers in your company is a really good question. And have you ever said, how come I did not know that? The Texas floods, another governance failure. Flood maps were created, plans were made to mitigate the flood-prone regions, but because of decentralized governments, They did not communicate at all levels of government. And this is one which I can relate to because one of my students was involved in this. The BP oil Deepwater Horizon disaster, operational complexity. It took as many, I don't know how or what types of software he is, but in Deepwater Horizon, it took as many as 30 buttons to control a single safety system. And their emergency handbook was hundreds of pages in length. Too many contingencies, hard for any human to handle. Their safety system was paralyzed because the operators could not manage complexity. So from a risk management perspective, this company was ill-equipped to cap the well. Well, one of my students worked for ExxonMobil at their rapid response emergency center in Houston. They have 24/7 fully staffed emergency action teams to mitigate risk. They have helicopters, ships, they have cranes ready on a moment's notice to mobilize to rescue offshore workers and cap the wells. And a workable plan that obviously anticipates the critical risks of offshore drilling in the Gulf. Obviously, BP had none of this. Or the Texas ice storm, again, for my students. Texas would not connect to the national grid. Well, and basically people were freezing to death in the Texas ice storm. Well, one of my students, who was a owner of a small business construction company, took my class, and because of the ice storms, which are really not rare event risks at all, and have occurred many times, he bought large electric generators and heaters. He saved a number of lives in his neighborhood, but more importantly, he was back up and running his business in a very short period of time after that, and he quadrupled his business. Let me give you just two more examples regarding some of the risks in business. The meltdown at Liberty National Airport, Newark National Liberty Airport, was due to aging copper wire between 25 and 50 years old, which corroded and could not connect to the Philadelphia air traffic system. No redundancy, no backup system, and nobody even knew that this was an issue. Or at Reagan National Airport, they still use floppy disks and 40-year-old technology. Now, by background, I have my Coast Guard captain's license. And if I was taking a tanker into a canal or a channel, I can't be off 5 feet because I'll run aground. But at Reagan National, their technology was such that you could be 100 feet or 200 feet away, and there's absolutely no warning system that you're too close. Now, here's one for you from the meltdown of a nuclear reactor in Texas. Basically, the water going into the reactor froze because there was a freeze and they didn't insulate the pipes. They didn't know, and I think there was a movie made about this, and they didn't know how to mitigate the risk. They literally had to call in 80-year-old plus programmers of COBOL and Fortran who were called back from retirement to reprogram the software and cool down the system. None of the current operators knew how to code using this obsolete program. So before we continue, let me just mention that my students in this program range from small business owners, construction managers, contractors, professionals, architects, engineers, plus in the legal and accounting practice, and our risk managers in the oil drilling business. Some of my students are faith-based charities, and others head small not-for-profit organizations. So let's go to the next slide. Business strategy and strategic risk. This is all about the critical elements in your business. Do you know what makes your business successful? Do you know your core competencies? Do you know who your chief competitors are? What your competitive positioning is? What your defensive positioning is? What do you intend to do any product development to create new products? And do you know the risks that could hinder growth? And from an employee perspective, do you have the right people in the right positions? So let me give you 4 examples from my students. Again, these are executives in their 40s and 50s about strategy and business purpose. One is the head of an internet marketing firm, and this is his position. and this is his perspective and strategic objective. We serve our customers with the best internet marketing tools. This commitment is to our customers and has generated double-digit growth for our business. Second example, professional practice. We provide our clients with the best case-based and code-based tax and financial planning advice. Our clients rave about us, and we have a backlog of potential clients. Example 3, creating competitive advantage. Another student, we craft beautiful and original pottery that has won awards. We've been asked to display our products in prestigious craft shows around the country. Example 4, creative fashion design. Our high fashion clothing is worn by the divas in Hollywood. They rave about its quality and design. We no longer use traditional advertising to build our customer base. Let's go to number 2, the next slide. Culture, governance, and risk management. In a family business or small business, family culture and interpersonal relationships that is resolving family conflicts and managing a small core employees is fundamental to long-term success. Can you define your business culture? Do your shareholders, your employees, your stakeholders, do they share these values? Are there conflicting goals, for example? Share value, I look at profits versus shared value, which is the interests of the employees and the other stakeholders. Are there conflicts? And then in business succession, has it been clearly defined? And are there issues, especially when the business could be sold? Here's a couple of examples of my students that have defined their culture and their purpose. Here's one. Running a company with my husband adds a layer of complexity requiring mutual respect, transparency, and the courage to challenge each other constructively. Or the second, and these are all written statements for all of the stakeholders to view. My duty as head of a small business is to the integrity of my business and the employees who rely on my leadership. Or third, and I think this is very important, my duty is just not to build something profitable, but to protect the people building it with me. And here's a couple of takeaways also. And I don't know how many meetings you have among your team members in your business, but as a culture, developing peer equality is a best practice to get the most out of your teams. That is meeting in small groups, not huge meetings with everybody. And when you meet with some of your team members and your employees, you want people from the most senior level to the most junior level, because diversity of thought is critical in long-term decision-making. Now, I teach a course also in ethical decision-making, and when we practice negotiations, and I don't know if when you have your meetings, we use a round table and so that everybody at the table is equal. We don't let the head of the business sit at the head because it stifles honest and open discussion. We usually limit our discussions to 4 or 5 people. We also bring in people from the lowest level, the new employees, to the senior executives, because we're afraid of what we call unconscious bias or groupthink. We want the best thoughts of everybody from the organization. And one additional takeaway, which I would suggest, is that we appoint a trusted senior manager or employee as the enterprise risk management champion. Now, the person is responsible for identifying the risks and collectively that you've identified, updating risk issues, and reporting frequently to you and other members of your enterprise. Now, if you're the sole practitioner, I believe that obligation falls on your shoulder, but it's absolutely critical that risk management is not ignored or left on the back burner, but embedded in the culture of your organization. So let's go to the next slide. And we call this systemic risks, systems controls, or technology risks. Now, I'm sure you all use software, and most of your data is protected in the cloud. Some of you may use AI bots and use for application controls. I don't know if you use it for customer service. I know, or call centers or order processing. For 4 and 5, financial controls we'll talk about a little later. And the question, and 6 as well. But the question is, these are internal risks that are hardware and software applications that many of us take for granted. You know, as you may know, many of your applications are actually outsourced to third parties. Some of the programmers actually reside in the Ukraine and Russia. So do you have an inventory of your systems in the cloud? Do you have physical backup systems, or do you depend 100% on outsourced suppliers? And more cloud-based systems are being consolidated, and not all invest equally in the technology to limit entry of international hackers. And there's a statistic that says 94% of businesses over the next 10 years will be hacked. And what happens if you're hacked? Do you have any reliable data storage if one of the cloud-based applications is hacked and rendered inoperable? I want to focus a little on accounting controls and bookkeeping operations. So does the person who does the billing in your business open the mail, process payments, and make deposits and reconcile your bank account? Let me give you an example of what could go wrong. At a small municipal government in Ohio, this is a small town, a sole payroll clerk stole hundreds of thousands of dollars over an 18-year period, refused to take vacations, which is an internal control requirement, refused backup assistance, and the individual reconciled the bank accounts and the receivables and others. I worked at CBS corporate for a number of years, stations, programming, and others, and CBS radio. And at CBS, this is corporate, an accounts receivable clerk would take the checks down to the bank in the building, and with collusion of the teller, would deposit them into CBS Inc., an account which she operated and opened with as a personal account. She also did the bank recs, so these items will always be outstanding items. So my question is, from a financial and accounting control perspective, if you have inventory, you process returns, discounts, and allowances, is there more than one person who handles these transactions? And do you sign off on amounts greater than a certain amount, or whatever risk level you're comfortable with? As far as cash processing, do you have any risk management plans to safeguard your cash and revenue from hacking, misappropriation, and fraud? And how about the payment methods that you currently use? Credit card processing, PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay. Now, do you reconcile those accounts against your bank account? And then there's something about the AI revolution. But can you really rely on the data? Do you know its sources? And do you know its inaccuracies? For example, every industry is investing in AI, but it comes with a price. You have virtual chat assistants like ChatGPT, Google Bard, Microsoft Copilot, and they're used for sales and lead generation. But do you monitor them? And it also allows for deepfake technology that can be used maliciously and can provide totally incorrect and misleading information. And there's something else that seems to be coming now, especially the level of frustration of customers when they can't reach a person. I mean, when people call you, do they go to an answering machine or to a chat GPT or a whole IP process, or can they actually speak to a customer? We're finding that in a lot of companies, people are dropping their accounts because they can't speak to a customer. And that's a systemic and technology risk. And here's one for you, case study on ChatGPT. A local New York City attorney wrote a brief using AI, in particular ChatGPT, cited a number of cases that would prove innocence of his client. But unfortunately, the citation, the sources themselves were not only inaccurate, but they were wrong. And ChatGPT actually sourced false information, and the attorney was disbarred. Now, here's a really sad case study from one of my students. It happened a couple of years ago. One of my students was a senior hospital administrator at Chicago General Hospital. And management, and this is really tragic, and the reliance on AI. Management could not understand why they had significantly worse outcomes for particular surgery for young Black and Hispanic females on certain emergency procedures. The question was why? Well, it turns out that the doctors were using AI and other artificial intelligence programs to develop optimal treatments. But on further examination, it turned out that the population that they use, that AI used for this procedure was particularly and mostly older white males. And this was tragic, but luckily they got to the bottom of it. So let's go to the next slide. Geopolitical risk. And these are risks that you probably don't have much control over. But if you're sourcing goods from one supplier, you always should have a backup of 2 or 3 other suppliers that you can go to. So this is sourcing of goods from around the world. It's interruption of supplies from sole source suppliers, shipping delays. There was a trucker strike a couple of years ago where 20,000 trucks in America were idled at truck stops. Then there's other geopolitical risks like import bans on certain technology. There's also remote call centers, many times in India. Excuse me, it could be in China, it could be in Vietnam. And this could be a risk if there's no backup. And of course, you have subcontractors. Now, we live in a complex and interdependent world where interest rate risk, supply chain risk, inventory risk, inflation risk, tariffs, and even the availability of employing locals, gardeners, wait staff, janitors, laborers, presents fundamental employment risk challenges. Now, there's military conflicts and tariffs, but here's the interesting and scary thing that 300,000 American businesses do business with companies in the Ukraine, 200,000 businesses source goods from Russia, and US businesses use labor parts, materials, and technology services, lab testing equipment, and lab tests from both countries, the Ukraine and Russia. Now, a good risk manager, or as the head of your business, anticipates alternate suppliers in the event of catastrophic geopolitical activities. So let's go to the next one. Reputational capital or reputational risk. So what is your reputation? And by the way, this is an intangible risk that is so absolutely critical today because of social media. So what is your reputation among vendors, suppliers, lenders, customers, employees in your community? And what is your image on social media? How often do you check Facebook, TikTok, and do you monitor this? Do you check your reputation? Do you need a reputation consultant? And there's services that look at this constantly. And do any of future prospective employees rate you, or past employees who've left your company or business rate you on Glassdoor, or if you're a not-for-profit, on Charity Navigator? This is absolutely critical today because of the intangible risk. Warren Buffett, as you know, argued, and I think most of you know this, that it could take years to build your reputation, but it could be destroyed in minutes. So have you looked recently at your online sites, and how do your customers present you? And do they present you with positive comments? Have you looked at Glassdoor recently? And how do former employees or current employees rate you? Because excellent employees use Glassdoor to decide whether to apply to a company or firm. And do you ever need, or will you need, a reputational consultant to actively monitor your business reputation? Then most importantly, do you really know what your relationship is with all your stakeholders? The people that you borrow money from, your lenders, the bondholders, your suppliers, your customers, and of course, your employees. And how often do you look at the feedback or employee reviews? And how often, frankly, do you act on them? So let's look at the sixth area, exogenous or external risk, the next slide. Now, were you impacted by pandemic or flood or weather? And could you have operated a little differently? And are you prepared for future rare event risks, which are not really rare events at all? And there's a great book by Nassim Taleb called The Black Swan. Or do you need a simple action plan to notify everyone, all of your stakeholders, to reduce this risk? So these are the black swan risks, and by definition, they're large-scale events that lie far from the statistical norm and are largely deemed to be unpredictable, but eventually experience massive blowups, catching people off guard and undoing years of stability. The longer it takes to recover, the worse resulting harm to your business. So let's look at some of these, what we call rare event or hidden risks that, as you'll see, are not that rare at all. Pandemic risk. Now, there's no chief officer in the federal government, but rare event risks are not rare at all. There was H1N1, H2N2, SARS, Ebola, AIDS, today West Nile virus around the world, hemorrhagic fever, and now measles. And these black swan risks can interrupt your supply of products or goods or services that you need for your business. Illness at a foreign tech or processing centers around the world, food processing plants in the United States can seriously impact supply chains, leading to empty shelves, hoarding, and social unrest. Just as an aside, do you know where the word quarantine comes from? Well, it comes from the Italian word quaranta, meaning 40. And when the Black Plague hit Europe in the Middle Ages, the trading ships in Italian ports required the sailors to remain in port for 40 days. And if the sailors survived, you're allowed to go off the ships and into the cities. Now, there's also, and I don't know if you're aware of this, there are other infrastructure risks within the United States. For example, the electric grid is owned by one British company. And if you have businesses or suppliers in the Southeast, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida, in addition to the increased frequency of storms, there's been increasing in groundwater about 4 inches a year since the Ice Age, the melting of the Ice Age. And a study showed that in 10 years, 1 million septic systems will be in danger in Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. Has anyone ever even discussed this issue? So let's go to the next slide. So what I'm going to suggest is that if you do your monthly financial reports, or do some kind of bookkeeping report periodically, that you add a risk matrix to your monthly or quarterly reporting, so that you can not only identify financial risk, but also other non-financial risks. So this is a simple, practical way to build a risk management program. First of all, again, I suggest you identify someone who will own this. And if it's you, you should own it. And then you brainstorm, identify the critical risks that can impact your business, and then quantify that risk. Rate them. You could do this as a team. Rate each risk by impact, 1 to 5, probability, 1 to 5, and then multiply impact by probability, and that gives you the severity of risk. And then compare these risks against the other risks, and then identify which need immediate focus. So if you turn to the next slide, on quantifying risk, this is very simple, and you could do this on a monthly basis, and so you have both financial and non-financial reporting. Identify the risk area, and that's your brainstorming, and you could probably come up with 5 or 6. Determine the impact from 1 to 5, determine the probability, and then multiply the probability times the impact, and it'll get your severity. Now, here's 2 examples. For example, your best salesman is leaving, or salesperson is leaving, and going to your competitor, and they probably will take your best customers. The impact is 5, the probability is 5, severity is 25. This requires your immediate attention. Or looking at it another way, you know that your best salesperson is unhappy over the compensation package. You need to do something. You need to retain that, to handcuff them with long-term stay bonuses or other bonuses and incentives. The impact is still 5, but if you do what you need to do, the probability is down to 1, and the severity is only 5. And it gives you a really good sense of what is critical, what is important in enterprise risk. Now, if you go to the next slide, let's talk about Target, for example. Again, risk management works great. It can also fail in both large enterprises and smaller enterprises. Target Stores plans to invest billions of dollars to open a whole Canadian store chain. Risk identification, and we're using the simple risk matrix model. Senior management buys a very sophisticated German integrated supply chain warehousing system. Great, very sophisticated, very complicated. The software programs at Target are not that sophisticated. It's too complex, it's untested. The senior executives ignore this. They have grandiose plans. And by the way, the killer risk in some business is arrogance and greed. And they ignore the programmers. Risk quantification, impact is 5, probability is 5, severity 25. Outcome, systems failure, empty shelves in the newly opened stores all over Canada, but the warehouses that they had built and purchased a room for, they were overflowing with goods and services that could not get to the stores. Result, Target loses billions of dollars. They did not identify the critical risk in opening in a new market. And frankly, after that, they just abandoned the Canadian market. So let's go to the next one. Some of the takeaways are that, and it's not difficult to prepare a risk matrix. Now, if 87% of the value of a company lies hidden in its intangibles, that is a stable workforce, new products, sales knowledge, supply chain management, competitive advantage, unique products, unique services, your reputation. It's absolutely critical not only to manage these intangibles, but to be on your plate and to look at them periodically. So really, like a financial report, the risk matrix is a visual report of how well you do strategically to create long-term sustainable value for your enterprise. So let's go to the next one. And here's a case where this is a real example of a small technology company that develops software. So, and here, if you notice, you have probability, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of high, medium, and low. You have impact in terms of high, medium, and low. And then you have on the right, mitigation. What do we need to do if these are high risks? So in this case, phishing and social engineering is a high risk. Data classification, data breaches, loss of data, high risk. Malware, advanced persistent threats, credit card fraud, all high risks. Loss of commodity internet connectivity, password and processing, procedural testing, and employee training. These are all high risk. And if you look down from technology, you see all the other risks that we talked about. Strategic risk, reputational risk, human capital risk, risk governance, and external risks, supply chain, and others. So this is another way of creating a risk matrix that you could look at visually, because most senior executives are visual learners, and you can look at this every month or every period and understand what you need to do to protect your business and reduce your enterprise risk. So let's go to the next one. Now, Workiva, this is very complicated. Now, you could download this matrix for free, and you can actually use it for calculating impact and probability to get an overall risk rating. And on the left side, you can actually create the categories that are most important and critical to your business. But I strongly suggest you give this a try. And you don't have to do 20, you don't have to do 15 or 10, but why don't you pick the top 5 and look at them from the risk perspective, from impact, probability, and risk rating. We could go to the next step. So in conclusion, and frankly, a practical approach to risk management is probably the best way. Risk management is all about long-term value creation, what we call sustainability. And managing risk is a critical differentiator between long-term value creation and long-term value destruction. understanding the risk elements, and most importantly, your risk tolerance is critical to your business success today. Among the Fortune 500 companies 40 years ago, 30 years ago, only 50 of the Fortune 500 companies still exist. And if you look at the lack of risk management and preparation of anticipating, identifying, measuring, monitoring, reporting, and mitigating risk, many of the failures of these other 450 companies as a result of their inattention to intangible risk, the risk that actually resulted in long-term value destruction for these companies. So my suggestion is give this a try. Try it on a monthly basis. Do a simple risk matrix and update it continuously. And that way you could identify the intangibles that make up 87% of your enterprise. And that's about all I have.
Wonderful, Rick. Thank you. Now we have time for Q&A. So this is your opportunity, attendees, to ask your questions of a risk management expert and get some direction, some answers. Drop those questions in the chat or the Q&A box. And while we wait for people to enter their questions, Rick, so tell me, being someone who lived in New York for many, many years, are there certain risks for New York State that you can recommend that our attendees today kind of take into consideration as they're looking at maybe starting out their risk management?
That's actually an interesting question. I have to think about that. First of all, energy in New York is a risk, especially now. We've been talking to some folks upstate New York who had their electric bills doubled and tripled. And so that energy is a risk in New York. I think doing business in New York is wonderful because you have so many resources that you could go to. As you know, I don't live in New York anymore, but when I was in Manhattan, I mean, the creativity, the dynamism, from the boroughs, and then is wonderful, and you have all these resources that you don't have in most other states. It's the intellectual capital that probably drives this, and that drives growth, business creation, entrepreneurship, and long-term value creation. Absolutely. So New York has a special place, for this, and I don't see this anywhere. And I've lived in Europe for many years. I've lived in London and Amsterdam. I've lived in other parts of this country, but New York is it's the intellectual capital of America.
Thank you for that answer. So this is a really great question. How does small business insurance factor into risk manage or your risk matrix that you make for your risk management?
So is that small business insurance?
Yes, small business insurance. How does that factor into your risk matrix?
Of course, that's a very interesting question. The question is, what is it you're insuring? I think is the question, and what does the policy exclude? For example, does flood insurance have to be bought if you're in a flood-prone area? And one of the greatest risk failures in terms of risk insurance was when Dell Computer built $1 billion business in Texas in a flood-prone area, and within a year it was underwater, and they didn't insure against floods. That was not on their risk matrix. So the question is, by brainstorming, what are the issues that you need to identify, and are they insurable risks? Does that
And
make sense? Yeah.
yes, and Greg, I would love to have you chime in on this question as well of what are some typical types of small business insurance that you see businesses applying for that you work with at the PACE Center?
Sure. Most small business coverage, I think, can be placed in terms of two buckets. There's liability coverage that hopefully is available to a small business owner, and that can cover areas ranging from employee matters to product liability, et cetera. So there's general liability coverage that may be available. The other type of coverage is property insurance for the physical assets of a business. If you're a service-oriented entrepreneur, you may not have much in the way of physical assets. But if you're a typical brick and mortar business, there should be insurance coverage to protect the physical elements of your business, the inventory, chairs, equipment, and things of that nature. So yeah, basically there are two types, liability coverage as well as physical property insurance as well.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we had a comment of someone who said, based on what you were talking about with energy in New York State, Rick, that there are some solar and green energy credits that will be ending in 2025. So yeah, it may not make sense to do some of those energy efficient upgrades based on what's going on with government regulations. Do either of you have any comments on that comment?
Jenny, I think that's absolutely the case. Don't invest something that's going to go. That's a risk. Investing in something that's going to go away.
This is true. Okay, I know that you mentioned, Rick, the book that had the black swan risks.
Right.
We had a question about what are some of your top book recommendations for risk management?
I've been in touch with one of the authors, Sim Siegel, Simsegal, and he wrote this book called The Corporate Value of Enterprise Risk. And in fact, when he wrote the first edition, he identified a lot of the risks that subsequently occurred. He identified, the COVID risk. He identified a lot of other risks. And so he basically did the brainstorming a couple of decades ago. So it's the corporate value of enterprise risk, easy to read. He also creates, and Sim and I have had these discussions, these skull sessions. But his is probably the most practical, the easiest to understand. There's plenty of other books that are extremely technical. They're quantitative. The Committee on Sponsoring Organizations, the Treadway Report, has books, and they talk about quantifying risk and all types of equations and so forth. And honestly, my students don't really understand that, and I don't understand it either. But basically, what is simple? What are the simple issues? And Sim really identifies these very well. Corporate Value of Enterprise Risk. It's a great book, and Sim is a really good person.
Thank you for that recommendation. And we had somebody add a comment about insurance. I think that they are in a tech company, and so they said that there's a tech writer for these type of companies that do programs and games, but it is very expensive. So just another type of coverage that is available for those specific businesses. Okay, so our next question here is, and I think this is a fantastic question, of how do you find out about something that you don't know about that may become a risk for your business? Like, the danger of what you don't know.
Okay.
How do you address that risk?
You see, I think that's really great. Um, there's a certain number of common elements of risk. There's a limit to the number of issues that can occur in your business. And I think you just have to brainstorm what could go wrong. Or look at a structure, the book, which is structured on identifying practically every risk element. And I guess the real question is, what are the things that are going to drive your business down? What are the value destroyers in your business? Is it people? Is it services? Is it external issues? What are the drivers of the business that can create long-term value destruction for your business? And you lose your sustainable value. And I think you could probably, if you know what succeeds, you know what won't succeed and what will drive you. But in terms of exogenous risk, which is external risk, you're always going to have these rare event risks, and you can't ignore them. So I always have a rare event risk on your risk matrix.
Thank you. So another question now, what is your philosophy on balancing risk versus reward in business?
Um, I, my philosophy about reward is that the focus needs to be long-term value creation. And that should be the objective. Over time, how do you build your business for either business succession or business, selling or something like that? But it's basically all about long-term value creation. And if it takes lower profits to have a loyal workforce and a stable business, then that's one of the balancing acts that you have to think about. But I really believe that your reward is over the long term, and that short-term value creation at the expense of your stakeholders. There's a philosophy where they talk about share value versus shared values. And share value is, of course, your profits, and shared values are the rewards for all of your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your bond holders, your lenders, and so forth. And I guess my philosophy is that you want to follow the path that generates the longest long-term value creation for your business.
Thank you, Rick. And something that I just want to put in a plug for the SBDC here. On these last couple of questions with risk versus reward, and then identifying those risks that you maybe have not even thought of yet. That's a service that absolutely the SBDC can assist you with if you come in. Our services are free, and you can speak to a business advisor who can help you in this process. Greg, is there anything that you'd like to add on that?
Sure. It's interesting because we work with so many aspiring entrepreneurs. I tend to think of risk, the risk side of the equation, maybe a little bit differently. When I say a little bit differently, there are the common types of risks like, financial risk, emptying out your bank account, emptying out your savings, so on and so forth, the potential emotional toll. But, when I work with entrepreneurs, I also think about the psychological risk. Okay, those who are thinking, well, if I step away from my secure employment, should I, vis-a-vis the potential reward? But, you also have to ask yourself, if you don't take that measured leap, will you regret it? Will you regret not taking that leap? And I think that's a risk that's often not discussed. For those who are in business, as you said, Jenny, yeah, we can look at your business on a case-by-case basis, excuse me, using some of the methods that Rick outlined today, and help you focus in on the key ones that relate to your business and how you can possibly mitigate them.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. We have an attendee today who has a question about what if you're operating in two sectors? So under one entity, this person gives the example of digital health and consumer product goods. Is it wisest to score each with the risk matrix and then have the higher risk sector in a separate subsidiary? How do you recommend that somebody might approach that risk?
I think I would keep them independent unless they're financially interdependent. And then I would score them so that, what if something goes wrong in one of them, what is the impact on the other? And so I think you're absolutely right. Wisest to score each with the risk matrix and then have the higher risk sector in a separate subsidiary, because that one segment could destroy the other segment. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
Thank
Jenny,
you.
I'd like
Yes,
to add.
please.
Oh, I'd like to add something there. While the SBDC can't offer legal advice, and that question I think might be best, most appropriate for an attorney. What I can say, and I would echo, I think Rick's point of view, in that two separate lines of businesses might possibly be best served by two separate legal structures, two separate LLCs, et cetera, two separate corporate entities, possibly, so that the risks that are associated with one won't necessarily take down the other in a worst case scenario. And the most common example that I see that particularly those of us in New York, I think you'll see on a regular basis, is with real estate development. Because of the risk associated with a real estate project, like construction injuries and things of that nature, virtually every single real estate project has its own separate corporate entity, its own separate LLC, et cetera. And real estate developers do that so that the risk associated with that one project, 183 Madison Avenue, 616 Lexington Avenue, the risk associated with that one particular project are for the most part contained within that project and can't affect their other projects.
Thank you, Greg.
That's an excellent point. Absolutely.
That definitely makes sense. So we have two related questions here as we approach the end of our time today. So the first one was, of the various risks identified this afternoon, which tends to be among the most overlooked by small businesses? And the related question was, what's the biggest risk most small business owners don't even realize they're taking? So what can you share with us on these questions, Rick?
I would say for many, many years, I was doing, small business consulting for small businesses and startups. I would say the business risk is culture risk. That is basically, if it's a paw shop or if it's a company, who are you working with? If it's two brothers, or what are the cultural issues related to a family business? These to me are the greatest risks. Two co-owners. What if their cultures are not the same? One wants to spend a lot of money and grow fast. The other wants to, be more gradual and grow slower. I would say culture risk within a business startup is probably the most intense. And Greg and Jenny, you discussed a little about it, the psychology and so forth. And what do you, for example, your brothers asked, how much money are you willing to put up? Will you mortgage your house for this business? And the other risk-averse brother says, no, I'm not going to do this. So I would say culture risk is probably the second. Of course, is common sense risk, which is, what is it you want to do? Is there an addressable universe that you can go to that will actually grow this enterprise? Does it make sense? And who else is in the business in terms of a market saturation? And when we do business cases, this is exactly what we look for. What is your competition? What is your competitive positioning? What is your defensive positioning? And but basically, I would say within your organization, it's culture risk. The father, the son, the brother, the sister, the child. And by the way, in terms of business succession, there's a theory called the idiot grandson syndrome. And it happens all the time, where grandpa starts the business, he passes it down to a competent son or daughter, but then they hand it down to the third generation, who kills the business. And that's the idiot grandson syndrome.
Well, thank you for answering that question, Rick. We are almost out of time, so we'll do speed round on these last two questions. Aside from AI and trade war associated business risks, which you've touched on today, would you make a prediction as to any risks that you see becoming more prominent in the near future?
I would say, yes, there's business cycles, and we're actually at the end of a business cycle. No matter how you look at it, business cycles have never been eliminated by economists. So I would say one of the business risks now is the end of the business cycle. We've gone it out 15 years. There was 88 to 90, there was 2007 to 2009. I think we're at the end of the business cycle. And that's something that actually I think we have to be cognizant of.
Thank you, Rick. Last question. If we have somebody who is working on their brand on social media, what are some of those maybe what we would call underrated brand risks that they should potentially look out for?
I'm not sure I understand that question, honestly.
Yeah, so I think I know you talked about reputation
Right.
in your presentation, and so this person is trying to develop their brand on social media.
Okay.
What are some of
Right.
those other risks that you would potentially tell this person to be cautious about?
First of all, I would say you have to identify your space. And is it a clear, identifiable space within the product or service that you're offering? And then can you clearly differentiate what it is you're doing from a competitive perspective? And then I would say go with it, and you go with, every conceivable social media. Plus, also, there's also social approval, which is really critical that people say, wow, this is really great. Get as many people to say, this is awesome. You need to buy this product or services. This is really special. So the risk is not doing your homework and not identifying where your space is in the online world. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
answer makes sense. So we got through all of our questions. Thank you so much, Rick and Greg. I appreciate your input on all of those for our attendees today. As we wrap up, I want to thank Rick and Greg for being with us today. And also, I want to thank all of you for your contributions and your questions. You'll see a survey on your screen as we shut down. We love to get feedback from you about how things went today and what other topics would be helpful to you as a small business owner in New York. Any last comments, Rick or Greg?
No, I'm just very, very honored to be able to do this presentation. And I just hope that, you all, that's my Texas side, you all got some value out of it.
Thank you, Rick. Greg.
Oh, I just want to say, Rick, thank you very much. The information was great, and I would encourage the attendees. Thank you also for attending, attendees. But I would also encourage you very much to spend some time with the matrix and actually put some effort into the type of assessment that Rick has equipped you with this afternoon. I definitely think it can make a difference. And in terms of anything else related to your small business, again, I'd encourage you to visit our website, pacesbdc.org. Again, all of our services are free. Be happy to be of further assistance to you. And Jenny, thank you as always for handling the technology, making Rick and myself look good. So thank you, everyone.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.